I was talking to a colleague recently who had just gotten back from a reporting trip in Dhaka.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he described this scene that it really stuck with me. He's in this high-end cafe, the kind, minimalist, expensive coffee.
Right.
And he's listening to this group of young activists. And they're talking so passionately about the new Bangladesh. Their language was just full of these terms like vitocracy and democratic mirage.
Okay.
They were celebrating the fall of the old regime, almost as if, the hard part was over.
Yeah.
But then the power flickers and dies. A routine blackout.
A very common occurrence.
Exactly. And one of the activists, he doesn't even pause his sentence. He just takes a hit from his vape, and this little blue light, it just illuminates his face, full of this absolute certainty.
Wow.
And he tells my colleague, the old structures had to be smashed. The chaos is just the birth pains of liberty.
That's a powerful image of conviction.
It really was. But then as they walked out into the night, the whole tone it shifted instantly. A few blocks away, there's a crowd around a burning tire. The air is thick with the smell of rubber. You hear distant shouting.
Mm-hmm.
And that same activist, the one who was so eloquent about smashing structures, he suddenly looks around, grips his bag a little tighter, and just whispers, "We should get inside. The police don't come to this ward after dark anymore."
And there it is, the pivot.
That split-second transition.
Yeah.
From the intellectual high of revolution to this visceral, bone-deep fear of a vacuum where the state used to be, just perfectly captures the paradox of Bangladesh right now.
It absolutely does.
We love the story of the street taking down the giant, but we never talk about what happens when the giant is gone and there's no one left to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
Or the assassins at bay.
That scene is it's visceral, and it sets the stage perfectly for this deep dive. That core tension you just described between the desire for freedom and the absolute necessity of order, that's exactly what the world is watching right now.
So that's our mission today, then.
Exactly. To break down this multifaceted instability, because this isn't just a local political shift, it's a global tremor, and it's rattling supply chains and, frankly, redefining strategic boundaries.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've been looking at the materials, and what becomes really clear is that this isn't a single crisis. It's more like 3 critical overlapping layers of instability.
Yeah, that's the right way to see it. We should probably tackle them from the most immediate to the deepest underlying cause.
So layer 1.
The first, and I'd argue the most tangible layer, is the economic shockwave. It's all centered on Bangladesh's ready-made garment industry, the RMG sector.
This is where the world feels it first, and the price tags on clothes.
Instantly. Then we zoom out a bit.
To the geopolitical vacuum.
Right. That instability in the Bay of Bengal transforms the whole region into a high-stakes competition. We're talking about an intense rivalry for influence, especially through the development of these critical ports.
And finally, the third layer, the root cause.
The root cause. The underlying, almost theoretical crisis of state capacity in South Asia. We really need to understand why concepts like illiberal democracy and transition failure aren't just academic terms. They're the lenses that best explain this dangerous vacuum of governance we're seeing.
All right, let's start at the beginning then. Phase 1, the immediate economic shockwave, the garment industry exodus. This industry is it's vast, isn't it? It's more than a sector. It's the whole engine.
It truly is. I mean, to call the RMG industry crucial is a massive understatement. It is the reason Bangladesh is one of the world's largest producers and exporters of ready-made garments.
Just put the scale into perspective for us.
Think about every major international retailer. The affordable, high-volume clothing, your basic t-shirts, the fast fashion items. That stuff dominates global markets, and so much of it comes from Bangladesh.
And when you talk about economic dominance, what are the numbers? How severe is this shock?
It is the absolute lifeblood of their foreign exchange. We are talking about a sector that contributes something like 80% of Bangladesh's total export revenues.
80%, wow.
80. And beyond that, it employs millions of people, most of them women, which underpins social mobility, stability. When that sector shuts down, 80% of the country's external income just vanishes. Millions of workers are immediately vulnerable.
That dependency is what makes this so scary on a global level.
It is. But what's important to recognize here is that even before the current political turmoil, the crisis after Sheikh Hasina's resignation, the RMG sector was already dealing with its own problems.
It wasn't exactly a healthy industry to begin with.
That's a key point for context. I mean, despite its incredible growth over the past few decades, it wasn't resting comfortably. It was already facing really stiff competition.
From who?
Key regional rivals, you're looking at Sri Lanka, Vietnam, even India, they were all actively and often successfully trying to get a bigger piece of the pie. They were offering better quality, faster lead times, sometimes better labor standards.
So Bangladesh's main advantage was just being the cheapest.
Primarily, yes, it's cost efficiency. And that, by definition, is a fragile advantage.
And now, this political turmoil acts as the trigger. The sources are pretty clear that this power vacuum, the breakdown of order, it led directly to the entire garment industry shutting down across the whole country.
And that's the critical moment. That's when local politics becomes a global crisis. You have this immediate, massive disruption in output from one of the world's top 2 apparel sources. It creates an instant, sharp decrease in the global supply of textiles.
This isn't just a minor blip in inventory.
No, this has direct, painful, and very far-reaching consequences for global markets.
Okay, let's drill down on that. How exactly does a retailer who, say, ordered 5 million sweaters from Dhaka suddenly cope with zero output?
Well, first, they face immediate difficulty sourcing their usual volumes. They operate on these incredibly tight lead times, planning seasonal inventories months ahead. A sudden halt means they're instantly scrambling to find alternative suppliers just to fill these massive gaps.
And I can't imagine that's easy, especially for the fast fashion brands that need both volume and speed.
Exactly. The supply chain has inertia. Those alternative suppliers, whether they're in India, Vietnam, Indonesia, they might not have the extra capacity to just absorb Bangladesh's volume overnight.
And even if they did,
they probably can't match the historical cost efficiency. When you have to shift huge orders from the cheapest supplier to a more expensive one, that translates directly into a sharp increase in production costs for the retailers.
And this is where, as you said, the geopolitics of a supply chain hits the average person right in their wallet.
Precisely. Those higher costs are very rarely absorbed by the retailers, especially not in an inflationary environment. They get passed on directly to consumers. It shows up as immediate, significant price increases for clothes and textiles.
So your jeans suddenly cost $10 more, and the reason is political instability thousands of miles away.
That's it. And it goes beyond just price, doesn't it? The logistics are a nightmare.
So even if you find a new supplier, speed is a huge issue.
A huge issue. The ripple effect extends way beyond pricing. Retailers face massive delays. That means empty shelves during key shopping seasons, or way less variety in the stores. When a whole season's worth of stock is tied up because a port is blocked or factories are closed,
they have to take desperate measures.
Right. They're forced to use air freight instead of the much cheaper sea freight just to get crucial items into stores. That's a move that dramatically spikes transportation costs and, again, leads to higher consumer prices.
So this crisis isn't a bump in the road. It's actively reshaping the geography of where our clothes are made. This strategic shift to alternatives, it seems inevitable.
It is. It's happening right now. The ongoing political instability, plus the chronic energy crises in Bangladesh, has basically forced international buyers to fundamentally reevaluate their heavy reliance on the country. They're de-risking their sourcing. The cost of staying is starting to outweigh the cost of moving.
Which means we're seeing a big strategic shift. Buyers are actively looking for long-term options in places like India, Vietnam, Sri Lanka.
That's the strategic movement of capital and contracts. And while this might dramatically reduce Bangladesh's historic dominance, the crisis is forcing a significant and probably permanent reshaping of global supply chains. More diversification.
Which creates a huge opportunity for other countries.
A huge opportunity, especially for industrial hubs in Southeast Asia. The loss of reliable volume in Dhaka is a clear gain for, say, Vietnam, which offers political stability and established infrastructure, even if costs a bit more. Buyers are prioritizing stability above everything else right now.
Which brings us to the future. What does Bangladesh even do to stop this bleeding of contracts? It sounds like it all boils down to a return to basic state functions. The very thing my colleague saw failing in that cafe.
It absolutely does. The strategic actions required are all focused on bolstering foundational state functions. They need a stable, predictable political environment. That means transparent governance, consistent policies, effective conflict resolution, all essential to stop international buyers from fleeing permanently.
And the power problem is central here, right? It's not just an inconvenience, it's a production killer.
Crucially, yes. Investing in reliable and sustainable energy infrastructure is absolutely necessary. For a large garment factory, continuous power is non-negotiable.
A power surge or a blackout can ruin expensive machinery.
It can ruin machinery, stop production lines mid-cycle, and most importantly, destroy a supplier's reputation by making them miss deadlines. Addressing energy shortages is non-negotiable for industrial stability.
And that can't just be the government acting alone. It has to be a collaboration.
Indeed. The importance of public-private partnerships, or PPPs, is key. The government can create policies that incentivize innovation, provide financial help to manufacturers, offer tax benefits for new tech. But without the state being a reliable partner, and most fundamentally a reliable provider of basic stability, both political security and electrical power, the industry will just continue its structural erosion.
Turning a short-term crisis into a long-term economic disaster.
Exactly.
Okay, that paints a very clear and frankly alarming picture of the immediate economic fallout. Now, let's step back from the economics and look at the bigger picture. The regional power competition. When a state starts to lose capacity, like we're seeing, it creates a strategic vacuum.
And that vacuum is precisely what regional powers compete to fill.
In this part of the world, that competition is anchored firmly in the Bay of Bengal.
Absolutely. The Bay is indispensable to Bangladesh's economy. Just consider this. The seaports of Chattogram and Mongla currently handle over 90% of its international trade.
90%. So if those ports stop, the country stops.
It grinds to a halt. Which is why every foreign policy decision is this delicate, high-stakes balancing act. It's why Bangladesh has adhered to that famous non-aligned policy: friendship towards all, malice toward none.
It's often called a diplomacy of balance, or double hedging.
It's a survival strategy. They have to prioritize economic development while being extremely careful not to cross regional red lines, especially those set by the two major powers circling the region, China and India. It allows them to get aid and investment from everyone without fully committing to any one bloc.
What's fascinating is how this competition centers so specifically on these strategic deep-sea ports. We know they're vital economic nodes, but why have ports become the central chessboard for this geopolitical rivalry?
It really boils down to three core strategic utilities. First, their dual usability.
Meaning they're not just for commercial ships.
Exactly. Ports are rarely purely commercial anymore. A new deep-sea port might not be labeled a naval base, but its infrastructure can easily serve vital security purposes.
Like what? Refueling warships.
Refueling, provisioning, ship repair for naval vessels, yes. But also, sensitive infrastructure communication systems, surveillance equipment, specialized logistics can be installed within the commercial framework. It provides a strong strategic foothold without the political baggage of a dedicated military base.
The commercial aspect is the cover story, essentially.
Often, yes. The second point is about the supply chains themselves. Control over these port nodes means you can literally decide who gets their cargo first.
Is it that direct?
Functionally, yes. Control over these nodes gives you decision-making power over vessel prioritization, berthing rights, storage. This enhances a country's influence over global commerce. And during a conflict, that influence can be used to restrict or block access to certain ships or nations.
Okay, and the third reason?
The third reason is a function of massive economic scale. When a major power's local investment opportunities get saturated, they have to channel their domestic overcapacity, their excess capital, construction resources, expertise into infrastructure abroad. It strengthens trade ties and strategically supports their objectives overseas.
That context brings us directly to the China-India port dynamics playing out in Bangladesh. We've seen this rivalry in key decisions about specific locations.
Look at the case of Sanadia. Bangladesh dropped its plans for a massive deep-sea port there. The official reason was environmental concerns.
But that wasn't the whole story.
Not really. Similar environmental issues exist at other sites. Most analysts saw the decision as being heavily influenced by other factors. It was a clear instance of political hedging. Dhaka was worried about pushing the balance too far in one direction.
But the Matarbari deep sea port is proceeding. And that project is really revealing because the support is coming from Japan, a close ally of India.
Matamari is a perfect example of India's counter-strategy. India sees itself as the net security provider of the region, and it views Beijing's expanding footprint, the string of pearls theory, with acute concern.
So they're trying to counterbalance.
vigorously. But India often faces economic constraints on these multi-billion-dollar projects. So they use strategic partners, like Japan, who can compensate for India's own financial limitations while ensuring the project stays aligned with New Delhi's regional strategy.
But China comes at this from a position of almost limitless financial capacity, all under the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative.
Right, the Maritime Silk Road is the sea leg of the BRI. It's this huge global initiative to connect nations and expand markets for its state-owned companies. The goal isn't just to build infrastructure, but to foster economic cooperation and strategically integrate nations into its sphere of influence.
And the specific mechanism they use for these port projects is key, right? It's why it's so appealing to countries that need cash.
Absolutely. China has this immense financial capacity because its state capitalist model allows it to channel massive coordinated overcapacity directly into foreign projects. They use powerful national development banks like the China Exim Bank and new multilateral banks like the AIIB to finance these projects at a scale and speed others just can't match.
And the loans come with some very specific terms.
They do. One common condition is that the construction must be handled by Chinese firms. This ensures the funds flow right back into the Chinese economy. But more importantly, there are often collateral clauses or debt equity swaps.
Can you break that down for us?
In short, if the host country defaults on the massive loans, control of the port facility can be transferred to the Chinese creditor for a long period, often 99 years, to service the debt.
So a commercial deal becomes a strategic foothold.
Exactly. This transfer of control upon default mechanism transforms the transaction, immediately bolstering China's global power projection.
Okay, so now let's look at India's countermeasures. As you said, New Delhi is worried about losing its regional primacy.
So India is trying to counterbalance this through its own coordinated commercial engagement. It uses a government entity, India Ports Global Ltd, or IPGL, to run foreign ports of strategic value. You also have private firms like Adani Ports operating overseas.
And in Bangladesh specifically.
IPGL is actively developing and managing facilities at Mongla Port. But critically, India also extends substantial financial assistance through concessional lines of credit, or LOCs.
These are soft loans.
Very soft loans. Low interest rates, long repayment periods. They've extended over $7.8 billion to Bangladesh alone, covering all sorts of infrastructure.
But the scale is just different, isn't it? That highlights India's central constraint.
That's the reality. India's development banks operate under stricter constraints than Beijing's state finance apparatus. The LOCs are development assistance, which is often a slower process. It's not focused on the singular multi-billion-dollar mega projects that China specializes in.
Which is why they have to bring in allies like Japan for the big projects like Mutterburi.
It's a subtle but constant high-stakes game. And this rivalry finds a really terrifying cautionary tale right next door in Myanmar.
A nation caught in a full-blown civil war and a total collapse of state capacity.
Myanmar is a compelling and frankly a very concerning example. In a civil war, foreign policy loses all direction. But China has a distinct edge over India there because of its non-discriminatory approach. They're willing to talk to the military junta and strategically influence major rebel groups at the same time.
Whereas India has a policy of only engaging with the recognized government, which in Myanmar's fractured reality is a major limitation.
It's a huge limitation. India acquired control of Sitwe Port as part of its massive Caledon multimodal transit transport project. The vision is immense, to link its landlocked northeast region to the ocean, bypassing that narrow Siliguri corridor.
And this isn't just a port, it's a whole network.
It's a colossal undertaking. A port at Sitwe, a river navigation system, a complex network of highways into Mizoram in India. The ambition is to dramatically cut travel times and costs.
But the whole project is failing because of that local vacuum of order.
That's the tragedy. The effectiveness of the entire network is highly questionable right now because of the civil war. The Iraqi army, a major rebel group, controls crucial transit routes. They've signaled that foreign stakeholders have to engage with them, not just the junta.
Which puts New Delhi in a serious bind.
A huge dilemma. It conflicts with their policy, and it's rendered their massive investment functionally paralyzed.
Meanwhile, China is pushing ahead.
Aggressively. They're making steady progress on the Kok-Phu Port project, a $7.3 billion project. This port is the southern endpoint of the China-Myanmar economic corridor. Once it's done, it gives China's landlocked Yunnan province direct access to the Indian Ocean.
A huge strategic advantage.
Massive. It offers an alternative to the congested Strait of Malacca, smoothing trade routes and dramatically enhancing its energy security.
It's just fascinating how this geopolitical struggle is a direct consequence of the domestic issues we started with. It's the root problem, the failure of state capacity, that opens the door for all this external competition.
Which brings us perfectly to phase 3, the crisis of state capacity and the democratic mirage. The instability in Bangladesh isn't unique. It reflects a broader, recurring, and very dangerous pattern across South Asia.
And that is?
The consistent failure of democratic transitions to actually consolidate. Instead, they lead to prolonged political instability or, eventually, a return to military intervention.
This is where we need to break down those terms from the opening anecdote. The illiberal democracy and vitocracy.
Let's start with illiberal democracy. The idea is that a state might conduct free and fair elections. You have the formal ritual of democracy, but it fundamentally fails to establish the rule of law or uphold essential civil liberties.
So the election is a facade, but the real power operates outside the Constitution.
Exactly. Countries like Bangladesh are often classified as illiberal democracies or hybrid regimes. You have a mix of democratic rhetoric and authoritarian control. You can vote, but judicial independence, press freedom, protections for the opposition, that's all hollowed out.
It's a system that lacks true legitimacy.
And sustainability. And that brings us to vitocracy.
What does that mean in this context?
Vitocracy describes a system that is just paralyzed by mutual hostility. It's when competing factions, political parties, the judiciary, military elites all have the power to veto or block necessary reforms. It leads to total institutional gridlock.
So one side's primary goal isn't to govern, but just to stop the other side from governing.
Precisely. And that paralysis prevents the state from ever tackling vital tasks like reforming the energy sector or fighting corruption, which just accelerates the failure of state capacity.
This failure to consolidate brings us back to something crucial: the link between economic conditions and regime reversal.
The link is undeniable. Economic stagnation is a direct, immediate threat to democratization. States that go through prolonged recessions during a transition are significantly more likely to revert to authoritarianism. When people are suffering, they tend to prioritize order and basic needs over abstract freedoms.
So conversely, if a new democracy can deliver jobs, infrastructure, and reliable power, it builds legitimacy.
And that is precisely why the economic and energy crises we talked about in phase 1, the flight of the RMG industry, the lack of reliable power, directly contribute to the erosion of Bangladesh's political institutions.
The promise of the revolution rings hollow when the lights go out.
Exactly. When the state can't deliver basic public goods, the whole concept of democratic accountability loses its meaning.
Let's talk about the military's role in all this. It's a huge obstacle to genuine order in the region. We think of it as a sudden coup, but the influence is much more entrenched.
It's structural and pervasive. In many South Asian nations, Pakistan, Myanmar, and historically Bangladesh, the military has a disproportionate influence over governance and the economy. They often secure privileges during democratic transitions that ensure they remain a powerful entity outside of true civilian control.
And what do those privileges look like?
They go way beyond security. In places like Pakistan, the military often controls huge sectors of the economy through military-run foundations that operate major businesses, land holdings, commercial ventures.
So any real democratic reform would threaten their economic interests.
Which means those initiatives face formidable resistance. It stifles the evolution of a real democratic ethos. The military remains the perceived ultimate guardian of the nation, which prevents it from ever being truly depoliticized.
And we've seen transitions that were actually initiated by the military.
Right, and those are often designed to be temporary or hybrid, specifically ensuring the armed forces can regain power if the democratic direction is unfavorable to their interests. Myanmar is the clearest, most tragic recent example.
So you have this fundamental internal failure, which brings up the question of external intervention. The dilemma of trying to help a struggling democracy survive.
Well, Western democratic interventionism, promoting democracy through conditional aid or diplomatic pressure, has a very spotty track record. Especially in economically disadvantaged countries, the efforts often result in unstable semi-democracies.
Which explains why India, as the world's largest democracy, has been so cautious about promoting democracy in its neighborhood. They seem to prioritize strategic interest over ideology.
India's policy is a pragmatic, realist blend. Its objectives aren't purely ideological, they're rooted in strategic realism. Stability in its immediate neighborhood is the #1 priority because instability next door threatens India's own security and economy.
But if India's policy is non-intrusive and focuses on stability rather than deep reform, isn't that just endorsing a status quo that's inherently unstable?
That's a critical observation. It is a calculated risk. India uses a non-intrusive approach, focusing on development cooperation projects and capacity building, not overt political meddling.
The idea being that better-run state institutions will naturally lead to better governance.
That's the hope. So India's democracy assistance isn't about political pressure, it's tangible technical support. Funding training for diplomats, military officials, journalists, providing technical support for elections, like voting machines, helping with institution building. The focus is on enhancing the capabilities of the state machinery.
So the emphasis is less on abstract democratic norms and more on making the state function reliably.
Precisely. The strategic goal is pragmatic stability. The theory is that if democratic governance can take root and reliably deliver public goods, it advances peace.
This whole deep dive really brings us full circle. The failure of states to transition from just having elections to being a substantive, liberal democracy that creates instability that ripples outwards.
From the global economy to geopolitical competition in the Bay of Bengal.
And back to that intellectual conviction for revolution in Dhaka, the desire to smash the old structures, which just dissolved into fear when the lights went out.
That is the cold, hard reality of what happens when the failure to build resilient state institutions becomes complete.
So the critical synthesis here is that the future of Bangladesh and the stability of the entire Bay of Bengal, it doesn't hinge on abstract political ideals. It hinges on the capacity of its government to perform the unglamorous but absolutely vital tasks of statehood.
We're talking about securing reliable energy, maintaining essential infrastructure, providing security on the streets, and preventing the monopolization of power from returning to non-civilian actors, like a politicized military.
And the geopolitical stakes ensure that regional powers will just keep competing to fill that vacuum,
making the cost of failure far-reaching and felt immediately across the globe, from the price of a t-shirt to the balance of power in Asia.
The ultimate lesson from this deep dive feels like a pragmatic one. When we look at nations in transition, we often search for grand narratives of justice and freedom. But this crisis in Bangladesh reminds us that the success or failure of democracy and stability itself is often determined not by what happens at the ballot box, but by the reliability of the electrical grid.